Deputy Minister Elnur Mammadov of Azerbaijan. Welcome to the Manila Times, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for including us in your schedule. I'd like to talk to you about Philippine-Azerbaijan relations. My colleague here, Ben Kritz, who writes a column and some editorials with me, will do most of the questioning, but maybe we can just have a statement from you. What is the purpose of your visit to Manila? I know you've met with our Secretary of Foreign Affairs this morning, but maybe we should hear from you. What's the purpose of this trip?
Sure, and thank you for inviting me. It's my first visit to the Philippines. Last year, we celebrated the 30-year anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Azerbaijan and the Philippines. We had the exchange of congratulatory letters at the highest level, at the levels of the presidents, heads of states, also at the levels of foreign ministers. And the purpose of this visit is to hold the first inaugural round of political consultations between the foreign ministers of two states. We will be holding that inaugural session tomorrow with my counterpart at the Department of Foreign Affairs. We will also be signing a first intergovernment document tomorrow between the Minister of Culture of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts of the Republic of Philippines. That is the main purpose of the visit. Of course, this is also a chance for us to reinvigorate our relations after the pandemic. During the pandemic, for almost 2 and 3 years, the borders were closed because of the lockdowns all over the place, and that also, of course, had a negative impact on the way we develop our bilateral relations with many states, especially with the states which are geographically are quite distant from our region. So from that perspective, we believe it's a very good chance for us to have a face-to-face talk to discuss our both bilateral and multilateral agenda, and also the developments in our region, both in our region and in the region where the Philippines is located.
Okay. Now, of course, you're aware that probably most people in the Philippines are not very familiar with Azerbaijan. I countered that this morning, speaking to a couple of people, and their first question was, "Where is that?" In your bilateral meetings here, you said about the cultural agreement. Are you hoping for some at least starting steps to perhaps some greater trade discussions down the line, or particularly exchanges in tourism, perhaps? Of course, opportunities for overseas workers, in the Philippines is always a key subject for the people here. Are you looking to kind of start? This would be a basic meeting, but are you looking for, the next one to start to take shape?
Yes, in fact, it's the first kickoff meeting, which should be about the overall outlook for our bilateral agenda. It will be about the political agenda, the economic agenda. It will be about the cultural and humanitarian areas and spheres as well. So because of it being the first round, I think we will need to take a sort of broader look on where we stand in general in terms of, as you mentioned, the trade turnover, which is minimal for now, but how we could harness the opportunities that are out there, given our geographical location as a transit country between East and West, giving the new opportunities that are emerging in a post-pandemic era, and the ways to deepen our ties in other spheres, not only in the economic area, but also in, as I said, in cultural and humanitarian and education and tourism and migration and other areas of mutual interest. So it is symbolic that the first document that we are signing is in the field of culture, which is something to explore, and I would call it a soft power, soft diplomacy to start with. But that will also be a way to transition to more substantive areas of our bilateral agenda. As I mentioned earlier, it is important in the post-pandemic world to take a view on where we stand on issues of mutual interest, where we stand on the most recent developments on the global arena, things like the war between Russia and Ukraine, some developments in Europe, some developments in this part of the world, and to have a discussion around the issues that are pressing, where it's important for the foreign ministers and departments to interact and see other angles, see other views that are there at the table. So to me, it's a general broad discussion for the first inaugural session with a bird-eyes view of all the areas. But for the second round that we will be holding in Baku, and we will be inviting our counterpart to Baku to hold the next round of political consultations, we will most likely be having more detailed discussions around those issues.
Is your trip here? Are you also engaging with the rest of the ASEAN on this trip, or is that is that something that's in the future? Because that's one thing is that here in the Philippines are trying to make that alliance a little bit tighter. So I would think that you'd probably find a lot of common threads throughout the group here.
You're right. In recent months, I've visited some of ASEAN member states, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam. And in terms of our multilateral cooperation, let me tell you that apart from, there are actually two platforms where we interact closely. Apart from the UN, this conventional institutions, we closely interact with the Philippines within the non-aligned movement, where Azerbaijan has been chairing that movement since 2019. And last year, our chairmanship was extended for another year. So we will be, our chairmanship completes by the end of this year, but we will be a member of so-called Troika as a former chair for the coming 3 years. That's one platform where we've interacted closely with the Philippines, where we've introduced important initiatives over the last few years. Unfortunately, our chairmanship, it coincided with the onset of the pandemic in 2019-20. And we started with extending aid to the non-members. We've come up with the initiative of creating a database with the needs for all non-member states, non-aligned movement states, including the Philippines. During the pandemic, we've been also spearheading efforts in order to fight against so-called vaccine nationalism, which was a serious issue where the high-income countries were stockpiling a lot of vaccines beyond the actual needs, while the low to mid-income countries, most of which are the members of the non-aligned movement, they were struggling with access to affordable and fair distribution of vaccines. And some other initiatives such as parliamentary network that we've introduced, the youth network, and the Philippines were shoulder to shoulder with Azerbaijan in supporting, co-sponsoring and supporting those initiatives. So that is one platform. And the second, as you mentioned, is ASEAN, which we consider to be an important instrument in terms of regional or multilateral cooperation with 10 member states. Part of that is my visits to this region, to the ASEAN member states. There are at least two dimensions, one through the parliamentary level, parliamentary dimension. Azerbaijan received an observer status at IPA, which is the ASEAN Interparliamentary Assembly in November last year. Now we have a sort of a formal status within IPA. That's one thing. Second, as a chair of the non-aligned movement, we signed the MOU with IPA through our parliamentary network. And that happened just a month ago. That one dimension. And the second, of course, it's a political level, as the chair of the non-aligned movement, we are interacting with ASEAN, which is obviously consists of the economies that are dynamic, that are fast growing, and provide a lot of opportunities for the discussion of economic for a lot of opportunities for the discussion of economic projects between the countries of our region and the ASEAN member states. So ASEAN is an important factor in our talks and in our cooperation with the Philippines. And so that is something that we hope we will be discussing and delve into details tomorrow as part of our political consultations.
I see. In terms of trade, now we did have some talking points earlier on this, but in terms of trade, what what do you see as possibilities of what here in the Philippines would be would be good for Azerbaijan, and vice versa? What can Azerbaijan provide the Philippines, in terms of trade goods, trade in goods or in services?
There are, of course, challenges in terms of geography. When it comes to things like where the Philippines economy has traditionally been strong at, such as agriculture, because of the distance, because of many other things that do not contribute much to the large trade turnover between the two states. So we need to find ways to overcome that. We are, in terms of where we stand now, we're talking about not a significant amount. I think today it's 5 to 6 million in trade turnover. It boils down to electric equipment and to some products that are being shipped from the Philippines to Azerbaijan. Traditionally, and still, we continue to sell crude oil and petrochemicals to this region. If you look at the ASEAN member states, the significant portion of our trade with this region comes to the crude oil and petrochemicals. So we look at this as an opportunity to expand our talks around possible ways to increase the trade turnover. But that, again, will depend pretty much on how we overcome those challenges. We see the opportunities for the Philippines to consider Azerbaijan as a transit route for its shipments to Europe, because many countries do, through the middle corridor, which goes through the China, Central Asia, and then the Caucasus, and then to Europe. And many countries in this region, especially after the war between Russia and Ukraine, started considering alternatives. But that is potentially one of the areas where we think we could expand our cooperation. Obviously, the other areas, they would be in the field of maritime industry. We have built a modern state-of-the-art port on the Caspian Sea, and the Philippines, due to its sort of historic background, being having excelled in training of seafarers, having excelled in management of ports, given that we have the largest commercial commercial fleet on the Caspian Sea, could be one of the areas for cooperation that we have in mind. The other thing that we are considering is investments in renewable energy. Azerbaijan historically has been an oil and gas producing country. It is still, but in terms of diversification from fossil fuel to green energy and renewable energy, we are investing a lot in that area as well. And we know that geothermal energy has been the important source of energy for the Philippines, and you are quite experienced in that. So I wouldn't look at it purely from a trade turnover perspective. We're looking at other economic opportunities that are out there, understanding and acknowledging the difficulties and challenges that we have in terms of geography and not being very familiar with this market, but trying to focus on commonalities rather than things that differentiate this market. So I think this is where we stand in terms of economic prospects for our cooperation. But a lot has to be done, given that this is quite a baseline level.
Right.
And it is a baseline compared to other countries of this region. So I think a lot needs to be harnessed in this market as compared to other ASEAN member states, where we have developed and deepened our economic ties much further.
One thought that occurred to me when I was considering what we might talk about today is that knowing that Azerbaijan is a big energy producer, this country here has developed quite an appetite for gas, which is it's probably a good thing, as opposed to some alternatives. Obviously, delivery would be quite challenging, but is there any prospect of development along those lines?
So definitely when it comes to export of natural gas, we play an important role in the energy security of Europe, especially over this notorious last 12 months. The expansion of our cooperation with the European Union is one of the examples. We signed the MOU with the European Union in order to expand the supply of natural gas twice to 20 billion cubic meters by 2027, excuse me. When it comes to other areas, we're mostly talking about LNG, because that obviously the transport of gas requires pipeline, and those pipelines are built primarily towards Europe via Georgia and Turkey. We're now shipping natural gas to Italy via the territory of Albania. Also, we sell gas to Bulgaria, Greece, now from this year to Romania and Hungary. We do not do LNG much, which would be the area for the sort of distant geographies such as Southeast Asia. So natural gas is an important part of our export now, but it's oriented mostly to the European countries and to the European market. But of course, there are alternatives in the LNG market for other countries to consider. So I can't say that is sort of the hot button issue on our agenda now, but at some point through the ministers of energy, I think the agencies of two countries, they could consider the ways to expand the cooperation in that sector. So if you look at examples of other countries, in some cases we are offered to build LNG terminals in order to on the one hand that provides sort of a serious public-private partnership opportunity for a foreign government, and on the other hand, it provides for an opportunity for the country to import LNG through the terminal, the state-of-the-art terminal. But we don't have those discussions. I think that they would be much advanced for us. So we are looking at more basic opportunities at this stage.
Minister, you mentioned Ukraine a few times. What's your reading of the situation there? I mean, from your perspective, because I think you're in a pretty unique situation from your country, and your reading of the situation may be different from our understanding of it. But how do you see it?
Well, I wouldn't say it's fundamentally different.
Okay.
From the first day, we called on the parties to return to the negotiating table. We stand by the territorial integrity and inviolability of borders of all states, including Ukraine, and we have been vocal in support to the fundamental principles of international law. Actually, in the first days of restoration of our independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, Armenia violated the international recognized borders of Azerbaijan and occupied almost 20% of our international recognized territories. That was condemned by the United Nations Security Council in 1993 through 4 resolutions that were adopted at the time, but unfortunately they were not implemented. And then only in 2020, Azerbaijan, as a response to the yet another attack by Armenia, had to launch a counteroffensive to liberate its territories. In terms of the war between Russia and Ukraine, we also provided humanitarian aid to Ukraine. So far, we've provided the aid worth of 19 million euros. From the first day, we do have public and private investments in Ukraine, and part of that is investments of the state oil company of Azerbaijan, SOCAR, which owns almost 60 gas stations across Ukraine. So we started providing free fuel to ambulances and fire trucks in the very first days when the war started. Also, there are rehabilitation programs for Ukrainian children that travel to Baku, to Azerbaijan from time to time. Of course, we are very much concerned with human suffering, with the fact that of growing civilian casualties as a result of this war, and we continue to call on the parties to find an amicable solution to the conflict. That's where we stand.
Well, we heard about the impact mainly on Western Europe, right? And but has there been a fallout? I mean, have you suffered anything economically? And I think the second question to that is, do you see a resolution to it in this year or anytime soon? Because it seems like from our perspective, there seems to be no end in sight to the fighting.
In terms of the economic impact, of course, Russia and Ukraine, there are important trading partners for Azerbaijan.
Sure.
Russia actually is number 3 in terms of the trade turnover. And after the war started, of course, that had negative impact on certain products. At some point, they stopped exporting to Azerbaijan, and we had to find alternatives for things like grain. You know, there were a lot of discussions around the grain corridor that Turkey has mediated between Russia and Ukraine. So there were serious economic consequences, and we had to look for alternative suppliers. I think now it has somewhat stabilized because you sort of got used to the situation. Now you're more aware of the challenges, and you're better prepared. The other challenge that we had was the fact that there are large diasporas both in Russia and Ukraine of Azerbaijanis. And after the war started, we had to evacuate almost 16,000 Azerbaijanis from Ukraine. And because of no-fly zone, we had to be sort of more creative through the territory of Moldova, through the territory of Poland. It had to be organized by the government of Azerbaijan, and we did organize that. Some people have now returned to Ukraine, to Kyiv mostly, to the western parts, but others are still in Azerbaijan. So especially in the first months, we faced significant difficulties. In terms of the resolution, I think it's hard to forecast. As some people say, it's hard to forecast, especially the future. So from that perspective, I think that the way we see for that is diplomacy, not continuing to wage war and trying to find a solution on the battlefield. We think diplomacy would be the only solution to this, either now or then. That's only the negotiating table that the parties have to return to.
Yeah, I have one more question, Ben, before turning back to you. But I was wondering if you can pivot a bit to your Indo-Pacific foreign policy, because China a few weeks ago proposed a peace plan that was, met with a lot of skepticism in this part of the world. But China itself is also involved in a number of, some would say similar issues with the Philippines and other states in the Asia Pacific. Does that figure into Azerbaijan's foreign policy, and maybe what are some of the things that you're looking at, right? So we don't see similar things that you're seeing in Ukraine, in this part of the world.
I think we're not that exposed to this part of the world for natural reasons.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is to strike a balance, and of course maintain amicable and friendly relations with all the states in this region. So from that perspective, our foreign policy priorities, they are pretty much the same. To have our own bilateral agenda with each and every state, depending on the sort of competitive advantages and specifics of each state, and also try, in the case of potential conflict, try to offer mediation if possible and if that is relevant. So for in the Asian Pacific area, we are looking mostly for the ways to expand our cooperation through the organizations such as ASEAN, and that is why I mentioned earlier that's an important component of our expansion of our footprint in this region. But also, of course, you have to be cognizant of the fact that Azerbaijan is not a big country with many resources, so we have to be realistic in terms of what we can achieve in this region. So for that, these visits are important to come and explore the specific advantages, peculiar to specific countries and to their specific markets. As I said, the energy, with many countries, energy is one of the sectors where we dominate in terms of sale of crude oil and petrochemicals in this area. And the potential for expansion, of course, is in the field of renewable energy, leveraging that experience when it comes to the Philippines, the management of seaports. We have developed a good cooperation with some of the countries of this region in managing ports and helping us to build shipbuilding facilities and plants in Azerbaijan, because that area, the transport, transit, and the logistics, we see as a major area for diversification from the energy sector for Azerbaijan. So I think that's where we stand.
I have a somewhat of a follow-up to that occurred to me. With your leadership of the non-aligned movement, do you foresee any possibility of maybe in the near future serving kind of a mediating role, particularly with your relationship with the ASEAN towards the ASEAN's efforts to form a code of conduct for the South China Sea?
That is not currently envisaged. I think we're not there yet. With ASEAN, we're at the primary stage of developing our relations. As I said, at the parliamentary level, it has just happened that Azerbaijan has been granted an observer status. Through the non-aligned movement, the efforts for the possible resolution to possible conflicts here and there, or differences, I should say, here and there, including in this region, over South China Sea, as you mentioned. I think they are at the premature stage, and that's not something that's been considered. But in terms of potential of the non-aligned movement, especially after the war between Russia and Ukraine, I think this somewhat brings us to the times when the non-aligned movement were established back in 1960s during the Cold War, when because of polarization, you had pretty much the West and the Soviet Union, and then the rest of the countries and the regions had to find their way on the political spectrum, where they stand and where they see their role. I think we're somewhat back to, unfortunately, to the times that are sort of reminiscent of those days, where the countries that are not part of bigger blocs have to course their way through those waters and navigate those waters and find their role and their position with respect to that standoff between the big powers. So to me, that means the non-aligned movement and the organizations and movements like that, their role would only increase going forward because of this current new realities that we're facing these days. So we're not there yet. As I said, it's somewhat premature, but in terms of whether it is possible, yes, it is possible that the NAM and ASEAN, they play a more active role in suggesting resolutions to various standoff situations across the globe.
You know, I mention it because those standoff situations are exactly that, standoff situations, and perhaps it would help to have, a neutral, friendly, non-involved leader, to help bring the sides together. You may find in the next few years that you're exactly what we need, to resolve some of these crises.
Any chance, do you think, of Russia maybe seriously considering a peace initiative from Azerbaijan or the non-aligned movement? Or, I mean, you know them more than I think we do, right? So I think for their understanding their mindset, I think it's...
Well, one thing I could say in the early days of the war, because we're talking about 120 member states, they are so diverse in political views and on the political spectrum in terms of which position they advocate for and stand for. It was difficult to come to an agreement, even on a single statement or declaration, characterizing the hostilities between Russia and Ukraine. So, as I said, in terms of the realistic opportunities for the non-aligned movement to mediate, it has not played a role so far. Mediation, there were a few countries that mediated, including Turkey, between Russia and Ukraine. Some countries were prevented because they had very strong views in terms of what is happening on the ground and were very much critical of Russia's actions. And of course, with that position, it's unlikely that they would be invited by the parties to mediate the conflict. So I don't see that at the current stage, that with 120 member states, you can easily mediate, because you have to be reflective of the views of that many states, which seems unrealistic. So I think individual countries of the region, they are better positioned in terms of their capabilities and possibilities for them to mediate the conflict between the two
Could
states.
I circle back to the green energy? You said Azerbaijan is investing quite a bit on renewables. Is that something you're looking to export to countries in the Philippines, or is that something that you're looking for foreign investors to go into Azerbaijan?
It's actually both.
Okay.
We have attracted investments from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. There are two companies that are investing almost $500 million in Azerbaijan to construct solar and wind energy, wind farms and solar farms in Azerbaijan, and they are under construction now. In terms of the potential, it's huge, especially on the Caspian Sea. When you talk about offshore wind potential, we're talking about potential of 157 gigawatt. Overall for the country, it's 200 gigawatt in terms of renewable energy. Mostly it's wind, offshore wind, but then it's solar. Also, after liberation of Azerbaijani territories, after liberation of Karabakh, we've identified opportunities there, almost 10,000 megawatts, 10 gigawatt for that region. It's also solar and wind. So we are both inviting investors to invest in renewable energy, but also we are exporting the electricity that we generate from renewable energy. In December, we signed a strategic document with Romania, Hungary, and Georgia in order to export renewable energy via the Black Sea, the cable that would be constructed in the seabed of the Black Sea to export roughly 4 gigawatt of energy, of renewable energy, to the Eastern European countries. So it's both in terms of expanding our capacities. There's also correlation between natural gas and renewable energy, because once you are able to produce more electricity through renewable sources, more gas is available for the export, and that is an important agenda for Europe for the known reasons.
For this region as well.
For this region as well. But as I said, there we have a pipeline network with 3-4 pipelines, the infrastructure is there.
Well, but it's indirect, because if you can provide more, you free up more gas and more LNG to other places, that makes the supply go up generally, and prices go down, and that works out better for the
that alleviates pressure overall on the market if Europe finds alternative sources. And Azerbaijan is one of the, as a European Commission President, she mentioned the reliable supply of a reliable partner, a reliable supplier of natural gas to Europe. So as I said, it's both the domestic, the foreign investments to expand the footprint of renewable energy in Azerbaijan, but also to export, because we do export electricity now, but we would like to expand that and export more.
Last question. I know you're running out of time. You have a minute, but I know this is the first of hopefully many meetings in the Philippines for your government. For those who are not familiar with Azerbaijan, what would you like Filipinos to think about or what would you like to come to our minds when they think of your country?
I think one thing we haven't yet mentioned is people-to-people contact,
Okay.
and we didn't talk about tourism.
Sure.
An important part of your government's revenues, of the country's revenues, but also an area that we've been developing. Before the pandemic in 2019, we've been able to generate 3 million tourists. That's for a country of 10 million population, which is a significant,
Fantastic, yeah.
which is a significant number. Now in the post-pandemic world, we are trying to reestablish all those routes, open the direct flights and direct connections to Baku. Obviously, we host many international events. Later on this month, we're hosting Formula One, which attracts a lot of audience. It's now 7th year that we've been hosting Formula One. Before, we hosted the European Games. So this is one of the destinations for many regional and international events. And we have become such a destination in the last 10 years because we have invested in public infrastructure a lot. We have invested in the public image of the country and continue to do so. So I think if we're talking about sort of ordinary people and the people-to-people contacts, of course, visiting Azerbaijan and getting to know more about the culture and traditions and history of Azerbaijan, that would be something that I would encourage the Filipinos to do. And of course, that comes on top of the very robust and solid political relations between the two governments.
Okay.
I've heard the fishing is good there.
Fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's,
I'd like to
Are you
try.
into fishing, Ben?
Yeah, I'd like to try that.
That's
It's a
something
big,
you can-
big sturgeons.
Oh,
yeah, sturgeon.
Yeah.
Actually, the Caspian Sea, it supplies 90% of worldwide sturgeons. So it's a major source of sturgeons in the world. And
Caviar?
Caviar is one of the
product you
major
could introduce
export
here.
products.
You know,
Yeah.
I would like that. But no, I'm glad you mentioned the Formula One because you know that's a fairly recent development and I imagine that's a pretty good draw for you. One final question that I was curious about. How many Azerbaijan, perhaps the ambassador could answer this a little bit better, but how many Azerbaijanis have visited the Philippines or this region?
are we in the roadmap of
Yeah.
Azerbaijani tourists going
I
to
think-
Southeast Asia? I mean, I think they go to Thailand first, right?
Everybody goes to
Probably, yeah.
Thailand.
Well, I don't have stats now, but one thing that contributes a lot is direct flights. Currently, unfortunately, we don't
don't
have,
have it,
so
yeah.
we have to use connections. That may explain the low number. In terms of Southeast Asia in general and archipelago states and islands, they are rather popular in Azerbaijan, and we do have sort of exposure to that information. Can we do more? Of course we can, and I think that's one of the things we will be discussing tomorrow in terms of ways to increase the number of tourists that are visiting in both directions. But again, I like to be realistic. I mean, I prefer to go gradually and step by step and see harness those opportunities as they emerge instead of having too ambitious but unrealistic plan. So I've heard a few days ago, I think as I was preparing for the visit, that there's a huge Philippines diaspora abroad, the migrant workers that represent Philippines abroad. So in terms of exposure and the knowledge of the country, we do have that knowledge. I think the probably Azerbaijanis know more about the Philippines than the other way around. But the actual visits and travels, given the geography, I think they can be better. And we'll see what happens in this post-pandemic period. Of course, for the last 2-3 years, we were totally out of business, out of picture, if you like.
If we need a visa, we just go to Joey.
For many countries, and I will need to check whether the Philippines on the list, for many countries, especially for international events, we do exemptions. You apply for visa on the border without going through the
Upon arrival, yeah.
embassy and applications. You just do it there, and it takes
That's pretty smart,
5,
yeah.
10 minutes. We did that. We normally do it for Formula One events, for example.
Oh, okay.
We announced it just a few days ago that for this year's Formula One, there will be exemptions for for those who are visiting F1 event. So we'll see where it takes us. So, but we have to start somewhere, and tomorrow is the start.
Okay, well,
You have some more? Or are you good?
no,
Oh.
it's, well, I always have more, but
Yeah,
I
we
think
also
we
have,
have,
but
right, I think we've taken up the minister, enough of the minister's
It's a
time,
pleasure.
and
Thank you.
we'd like to let you go so you can get started with that,
Yeah.
with that start between the
Yeah.
two countries, and we're glad that you had some time to sit down with us, and welcome to Manila.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you, Minister.